regular meeting in about 14 months, I think. So it feels nice to be here on a sunny Tuesday. We will also be live streaming it, so we do have participants at home, just so everyone's aware. We're going to start with our attendance. So I'm just going to go down the line. Director Smith. Here. Director Barrows. Here. Director Zavala. Here. And I am also here. Director Decker is on her way. There is going to be an agenda item later in the agenda to talk about our meeting start time to better accommodate the work schedules of our directors. With that, though, we have quorum, so we will get started. Our first item on the agenda is our Employee Excellence Awards. So our employee award recipients will be shown on screen. Sorry. Give me one moment here. I apologize for this delay. My document closed on me. Okay, here we go. So our first award recipients are Sophia Avila, Ekaterina Walla, and Fawn McKay. Sophia was hired as an interpreter translator in August of 2016. Katerina was hired in October of 1997, and Fawn secretary was hired in September 2014. From the Special Services Department, Vancouver Public Schools includes more than 3,000 parents and guardians who speak Spanish and more than 500 who speak Russian. Sophia, Katerina, and Fawn, based at the Jim Parsley Administrative Center, are part of a large district-wide team that ensures Spanish and Russian speakers receive important information. Their talents are critical to the ongoing work in the areas of equity and family engagement. So congratulations to these recipients. Their work is very important to our everyday work. Thank you. Our second recipient, yes. Our second recipient is Tori Hebert. She is a teacher at Fort Vancouver High School Center for International Studies, and she was hired in October 2009, excuse me. The many teaching challenges created by the pandemic have only vaulted Tori's teaching methods into new areas. She has pivoted her instructional methods to create powerful learning experiences for her students by combining technology with the hands-on experiences that are fundamental to her horticulture curriculum. Thank you, Tori. I just had the benefit of viewing the horticulture department, and it's such an awesome program that our kids get to be part of. So thank you, Tori. Next, we have Gabe Bravo, building operator at Columbia River High School, hired in August of 2009, and Dion Graham, custodial assistant at Columbia River High School, hired in April of 2016. Gabe and Dion worked tirelessly to help prepare River for hybrid learning, and then they continue to ensure that the building is a safe space for students and staff members. Both Gabe and Dion are praised by their colleagues for their willingness to perform their jobs with positive attitudes in all situations. Thank you. Thank you. Building maintenance has been a very tough job this year, so thank you very much. Next, we have Donna Essinger, senior dispatcher in the transportation department, hired in January 2006. When it comes to assigning students to bus routes and making changes quickly, Donna ensures that routing decisions are beneficial and that both students and bus drivers remain as safe as possible. She also maintains a customer service-oriented approach when speaking with parents or guardians and works hard to meet their needs. Thank you, Donna. Lastly, we have Lisa Woodruff, a paraeducator at Lincoln Elementary, hired in February 2004. Lisa performs home visits, teaches small groups of students via Zoom and in person, provides supervision at lunch and on the playground, and still always finds time to ask others if they need help. One of her favorite sayings is, "This is going to be the best day ever." Wow, what a great team member. Thank you, Lisa. So our next part of the meeting is our student board representative presentations. So we will be promoting our student board representatives one at a time. So our first presenter is from Columbia River. We have Riley Sharman and/or Maya Anson.
Hi there, it's just Maya. Alrighty. Can you guys hear me okay?
Oh, we need your, okay. Okay.
Alrighty. Okay, good evening, members of the board, cabinet members, and community guests. My name is Maya Anson, and
Yeah, I think they're working on it.
Can you guys hear me okay?
You are coming through okay.
Can you guys hear me?
Go ahead again, Maya.
Alrighty. Am I good to go?
Sounds good. Sounds good. Sounds good. Sounds good. Sounds good. Sounds good.
Maya, go ahead and continue.
Okay. Good evening, members of the board, cabinet members, and community guests. My name is Maya Anson, and I represent Columbia River High School. Our prompt this month was to answer the following questions. Why is it important to become a lifelong learner, and how does your school encourage or discourage lifelong learning? I believe that it is important to become a lifelong learner because learning is the foundation of the human brain. We spend our lifetime tinkering and learning and unlearning how to improve ourselves and the world around us in a self-aware perspective, and I believe that's what separates us from everything else. We as people are obsessed with progress, and that's why nearly every aspect in our life is competitive in one way or another, whether we're competing against our others or ourselves. In school, we strive to have the best grades. In adulthood, we strive to make the most money. And in our societal circles, we strive to look the coolest and act the coolest. This mindset is a growth mindset and is a process of learning and unlearning how to become better. That is why I believe being a lifelong learner is one of the most essential skills you can have. Our school encourages lifelong learning in a number of ways, the first one being through encouraging students to self-reflect. Now, I know self-reflection may not sound directly related to lifelong learning, but to me, I believe that it is, because by reflecting, you can understand a lot about what is what in the present moment and what has led you to that from the past. A lot of our teachers at Columbia River have regular and routine reflecting assignments that encourage students to take a look at what they have accomplished and/or completed. Then analyze what was good and what needs improvement to then learn what they can do to make progress. And this is the epitome of a growth mindset. Another way our school as a whole encourages lifelong learning is through making learning appealing. By making learning appealing, it associates learning with positivity, which then makes learning more likely to be consistently sought out for and practiced. I think our staff genuinely does a beautiful job of constantly making learning as fun as possible, and this is especially made through their efforts to give us students independence in our assignments and utilize our individuality. For example, I would say most projects have topics that are chosen by the students, allowing them to find what it is they feel they should depict and have freedom in how to display that. Also, lots of group work is done whenever possible, and this provides a positive and collaborative workspace for students to not only enjoy their work, but to have guidance on their work. In conclusion, I believe that being a lifelong learner is an innate trait in people that can and should be enhanced to reap the best results, and I think my school does a beautiful job of setting the foundation and positive tone for lifelong learning. I appreciate your attention this evening and thank you for your time.
Studies, we have Michaela Smith.
Hello, everyone. Okay, I hope you all can hear me. Good evening, members of the board, cabinet members, and community guests. My name is Michaela Smith, and I'm from Fort Vancouver High School. In a world that is constantly changing, shifting, and evolving, it is important for us living in it to do the same. The only way to change is to learn and grow. From the minute we are born, we begin learning how to walk, talk, interact, eat, and more. It's human nature to learn. As we get older, it's harder to want to learn things. The saying you can't teach an old dog new tricks isn't necessarily true. You can't teach an old dog new tricks unless they want to and are open to it. So by encouraging curiosity and giving them new tools, they can be inspired to be learners for life. An important aspect of learning new things is to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. Learning is hard because we don't always get it right the first time. Due to online learning, understanding things from home without in-person support has made learning a lot more challenging for our students. Teachers at Fort have adjusted to this, and now Wednesdays are open Zoom sessions for students that need that support. There is online tutoring that is put on by clubs such as National Honor Society, ASB, and Key Club. Another aspect of learning is passion. Learning is 10 times easier if you are motivated and passionate about the topic. So the many magnet programs and clubs at Fort offer students just that. From horticulture to welding, from medical to culinary, our students have a multitude of staff leading by example. I cannot be more proud of my school, which has definitely made me a lifelong learner. Thank you so much for your time and have a good evening.
Next up from Hudson's Bay, we have Karen Gallegos.
Okay. Good afternoon, members of the board, cabinet members, and community guests. My name is Karen Gallegos, and I'm from Hudson's Bay High School. This month's prompt question were, why is it important to become a lifelong learner? And how does your school encourage or discourage lifelong learning? A lifelong learner is someone who pursues to continue learning to self-motivate. It's important to build skills and build knowledge when becoming a lifelong learner. When you're building skills and building knowledge, you increase your self-confidence in your personal and professional life. A lifelong learner can understand and increase a better understanding of the world, and this can lead to be more and better and have better opportunities in life. How our school encourages our lifelong learning and how our school encourages lifelong learning is our teachers and students influence one another with our school's 5 traits. Our school's 5 traits are community, ownership, critical thinking, perseverance, and empathy. This encourages us to create a positive and safe environment for one another. Keeping a positive mindset and attitude can help you focus and take in information as you learn. It's important to continue to learn throughout life and carry this information with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Next from Skyview, we have Teddy Beaver. So we will move on to VSAA, Samantha Duncan.
Hi. Good evening, members of the board, cabinet members, and community guests. My name is Sammy Duncan, and I am from VSAA. To learn means to gain or acquire knowledge of a skill in something by study, experience, or being taught. And throughout our life, we never stop learning, making mistakes, and growing. And being a lifelong learner means that you are constantly improving skills, pushing yourself to do your best, and accepting that mistakes are just opportunities to learn. Doing this is important so that you are prepared for whatever life throws at you, academically, career-wise, and in general. VSAA encourages lifelong learning by facilitating an uplifting environment that helps students to learn in various subjects and skills. One way that VSAA encourages students is by providing resources for help and for any students who need it. Asking for help is one of the most important things to learn and do, especially when it can improve understanding. In the Zoom layout, office hours are provided every Wednesday for students to talk to their teachers about work and homework and all of that. And also, our National Honor Society holds a tutoring center every Monday and Tuesday to promote student leadership and also give another resource for students to check in on homework or get a range of help on different subjects from middle school math to high school physics. Another way that VSAA helps students to become lifelong learners is by creating countless opportunities to get involved in our school. Learning to work as a team and just being able to be a role model or leader for your peers helps students to improve upon many skills, such as responsibility and cooperation, and also helps students gain more confidence. Along with clubs such as ASB, our literary magazine, and Thespian Society. These all help students get involved in their art forms and also in our school community. Students at VSAA have many opportunities and resources provided to them that help encourage them to grow as students and as people, all of which help them to become lifelong learners. Thank you.
Thank you, Sammy. Next from iTech, we have Kira Navarro.
Good evening, members of the board, cabinet members, and community guests. My name is Kiara Navarro, and I'm from iTech Preparatory. At iTech, one of the ways we encourage lifelong learning is by having supportive teachers. Our teachers have encouraged us to be the best student we can be and have been our biggest supporters during the pandemic. Having voices and choice be a part of our learning styles helped kids have more choices on projects and a say in what they want and why. Given that I have had this opportunity, I've used it when it comes to projects. If they give us many options, for example, when I'm in history class and our teacher wants us to showcase what we have learned, they typically give us options of how to showcase our knowledge, to which I have used to my advantage. Teachers have helped us break down our learning problems and to focus on what we can improve on and how we can make it better. At iTech, we are given opportunities to solve and showcase how we solve the issue. Last year in Issues in Tech, which is an elective at iTech, I saw a need for making reduced food waste system into our school to reduce our food waste. This has been implemented into our school and is now being used to help reduce our food waste. Having innovation and curiosity in our school is a big thing. We always bring new ideas, method, and products to the table every day, especially when it comes to innovation at iTech. What we use at iTech every day is FAIL, which is fail, and this means first attempt in learning, which we use a lot when it comes to our school. This gives kids a second chance when it comes to schoolwork, our school has overcome all and has encouraged learning and has helped our kids every day grow to be the best that they can be. Thank you.
Thank you, Kira. Lastly, we have from Flex Academy, either Lucas Carter or Dom Pennington.
I want to apologize in advance for, wait, can you guys hear me? Can we heard? Hello? 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 Oh. Okay. All right. I'm just gonna. Good evening, members of the board, community guests, and cabinet. My name is Don Pennington, and I am here representing Vancouver Flex Academy. The question for this month's prompt are: why is it important to become a lifelong learner? How does the school encourage or discourage lifelong learning? The importance of becoming a lifelong learner can be very crucial to success. Lifelong learning not only promotes professional growth, but also personal growth. The self-motivated pursuit of knowledge can greatly improve the chances of success in the real world by giving the learner the tools and skills they need to be employed, such as competitiveness and employability. Lifetime learning can also be used to advance in a career, giving the learner a head start of how to do the job, or their new or current job. Flex greatly encourages lifelong learning by Flex greatly encourages lifelong learning by providing many opportunities for students to expand upon their knowledge on life through various clubs, activities, field trips, and even classes such as Real Life 101 and Food and Fitness. Flex works hard to make sure that the students attending graduate with the knowledge of not only how to survive in the real world, but to also thrive. Thank you.
Thank you to all of our student representatives. Those are always great conversations and great presentations to hear from. Next, we have our citizen comments portion of our agenda. Tonight, as we are doing a hybrid style meeting, we will be doing in-person citizen comments, followed by any audience citizen comments from Zoom. So first, I will read kind of the parameters. Citizen comments is the time in the meeting where the board and administrative staff like to hear comments from the public. If you wish to address the board and did not have an opportunity to sign in at the start of the meeting, please do so now. You may continue to sign in at any time during the citizen comments portion of our meeting. Because most matters require fact-finding and review, the board is not able to respond to any public comments made at this time. Additionally, the state's Open Public Meetings Act restricts deliberation on topics that have not been placed on the publicly noticed agenda in advance. If follow-up action is necessary, the board will ask the superintendent to work with the administrative staff to consider the information and respond accordingly. As a regular business meeting of the board, we expect the audience to conduct themselves professionally and courteously. Additionally, speakers are expected to be respectful. Personnel complaints and personal attacks are not permitted. The board asks that personnel complaints be submitted in writing. We ask that you approach the podium and state your name and address. For the record, you will then have 3 minutes to make your comments. If you hear a chime, please conclude your remarks. If you have materials or additional comments you would like the board to review, please hand them to Erin in the back of the room. This information will be provided to the superintendent and board. The board appreciates, listens, and cares about the broad range of perspectives in our community, and we thank you for your comments. Again, these are our in-person comments that we'll begin with, and then following these speakers, we will invite our virtual commenters. So our first person speaking tonight is Jonah Barnes. Oh, okay.
So these were just registered.
Okay.
So these are.
Okay, thank you. So just to go through our process going forward as we continue doing this hybrid meetings, we are asking people to register in advance online. And it looks like some of those that registered online in advance are not in attendance, at least yet. Our first person tonight is Ericbrenner Kelly.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me all right? Going through? All right. My name's Ericbrenner Kelly. I live at 9019 Northeast Lewis Drive in Vancouver. And I want to talk about principal reassignments today. And the angle I'd like to share with you is a relatively personal story. I am not up here to ask for any kind of individual treatment. In presenting a personal story, I'm just coming from a place of concern that when principal reassignment decisions are made, that the impact that it can have on individuals is perhaps not front of mind, or that people who are making those decisions perhaps aren't aware of how that can impact some people. My son and I are effectively new to the district this year. He's a 9th grader at Flex Academy. And I've been really delighted with how well received he has been and how at home he feels at Flex. I was really very concerned about him. He's what you might call a complex kid, and has been really very well received. He was very disappointed that he didn't get into VSAA. And yet when application times came around, I couldn't talk him into reapplying to VSAA this year because he was so happy with Flex. He's one of these kids who trusts with a great deal of difficulty, but he's found 2 people at Flex that he trusts completely. And I'm sure that has everything to do with why he feels so solid there and wants that to be his high school home. And one of those people is Steve Lindblom, the principal who has been reassigned. I've learned as I've talked to people about this reassignment that it was Steve's hope that he would finish his career at Flex, and that before Steve's tenure that Flex went through I think it was 3 principals in 5 years, something like this. And a lot of the staff is experiencing a fear of the disruption and of the future. And this filters down to the kids. There's a risk of losing other staff members because people don't want to, because of the disruption that people experience. And none of this really has anything to do with the replacement principal. I don't know much about her. Steve has spoken only in glowing terms about his replacement, and is doing everything he can to try to facilitate the transfer. But I just hope people understand that it creates a quality of insecurity that can be very challenging, especially for particular kids and for staff. Part of what has happened in my history as a parent has been watching my son Gavlin, for example, in what we thought was a school home during his grade school experience at a K-12 in Portland, which we thought would be his home school, at least through 8th grade. A new principal came in. There was a considerable culture clash between the new principal and the existing school, and things deteriorated to the point where we felt we had to take him out of the school after his 3rd grade year. There was a similar experience at a private school with our younger son, who actually left the school mid-year. After the head of school was replaced, and there was conflict with the board of the new head of school. So I think a lot of people have experiences like these, and our experience pales compared to what happens to some of the staff during what that can be a very disruptive time. With that, I'll conclude, and I thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Rob Aguilar.
Good evening, ladies and distinguished guests also. My name is Sergeant First Class Rob Aguilar. I am a retired Army senior non-commissioned officer.
Do you mind stating your name
Oh, yes.
and address for the record?
Yes, my name is Sergeant First Class Rob Aguilar. I'm a retired Army senior non-commissioned officer. I live here in Vancouver. I live at 10403 Northeast 21st Street here in Vancouver. My daughter is a senior at Mountain View High School right now, so I most certainly do have a vested interest in this community. And what I'm here to talk with you about briefly, I know there's no way it could be resolved here today, that it would require a follow-on meeting. But this is the way we always try to use, in the military, we try to use what we call the 3 Bs when you talk, right? Instead of going on for 2 years: be brief, be brilliant, and be seated. Or be brief, be brilliant, and be gone. Okay, so I'm gonna get right to the point. How many Marjorie Stone Douglases do you need to have happen? Or how many Columbines do you need to have happen? And a dear friend of mine who retired in the Army also, his younger brother was at Columbine, a senior on the day when that thing went down. How many of those kinds of events do you have to have before eventually you begin to realize that at the core of all of this is that the time-tested, time-honored values that you and I were raised on when we were kids are very often not being taught in the home anymore, and that actually is the core of the entire problem. Well, today I retired from the Army 3.5 years ago. I am today the assistant instructor of Army Junior ROTC at Oregon City High School, have been for a little over 2 years. Now, what I'm coming here today to talk with you folks about is to request the opportunity to be able to give a full-blown presentation to the school district for them to consider opening an Army Junior ROTC program in Vancouver School District. And just to give you folks just 2 seconds of perspective on this, I don't know if this will work or not, but earlier in March of last year, I approached the Evergreen School District in regards to this and asked them if they could or would be willing to entertain such a thing. And I ended up getting contacted by a Mr. Bill Oman, who is their senior director of secondary education. Some of you might even know him. And I presented to that entire school board about in May of last year. It was about a little over an hour for them to be able to talk about what JROTC is about and what it's not about. And in July of this year, as you can see by this email here, he actually emailed me back and said, Mr. Aguilar, I wanted glad to let you know that we have begun our application for an Army Junior ROTC program at Evergreen High School. Those time-tested, time-honored values is what we teach in Junior ROTC. This is not just about marching and marksmanship. Very few of them have marksmanship programs anywhere. What we teach is loyalty, duty, respect, selfless service, which is a concept that has become lost on today's me generation. Selfless service, honor, integrity, and personal courage. Time-tested, time-honored values. That is what we teach. We are a citizenship, civic duty, and selfless service organization. And what we bring to the school is unlike anything else any high school has to teach anywhere. At Oregon City High School, if you were to call their principal, Carrie Wilhelm, she will rave about what it is that we do, because it's like there's high school and then there's JROTC. And what we do at our core, being a service organization, has become invaluable out there. And so that is what I'm coming today to request, is for the opportunity to be able to make a full presentation to this board for them to consider an Army Junior ROTC program at some time in the near future. And I did bring a card, if anybody would like that. I don't know who I would give that to, but I do have that here.
You can give it to Aaron in the back. Thank
Okay,
you.
I will do that, but that
Thank
is
you.
what I came here for, Dora, and thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you. So our last speaker is Lindsey Mayer, our last in-person speaker.
Good evening. My name is Lindsey Mayer. I live here in Vancouver, Washington at 13216 Northeast Salmon Creek Avenue, 98660. I'm here to talk today about the Family Community Resource Coordinators and our compensation. I am here on behalf of all of the Family Community Resource Coordinators. Here today are 4 other coordinators representative from elementary to middle to high school. The rest of the Community Resource Coordinators are attending virtually in support as well. This is a follow-up to a letter that we as a team have sent to President of the Board, Kyle Sproul, and Interim Superintendent, Kathy Everidge. Throughout the last few years, FCRCs have been given hope that a salary study was imminent. After years of waiting for an accurate salary study to be done, we realized that we must also advocate for ourselves, just as we advocate for the families we serve. In our attempts to advocate for ourselves, we at times have received conflicting information. A few months back, however, we did learn that a salary study would be conducted by the district on behalf of the FCRCs. As recently as yesterday, we received an update that review is moving forward. For that, we are thankful, and we hope that our voices will be heard as we advocate also for ourselves for an equitable salary study with accurate data. The scope of the work of the Family Community Resource Coordinator has become exponentially more complicated as the years have progressed. Since the inception of this program, of the initiative, our climate and culture in Vancouver has changed. We work in an interdisciplinary manner, collaborating with teachers, counselors, front office staff, and administration in conjunction with community partners like counseling agencies, food banks, and housing departments, all in order to help bridge non-academic barriers to student academic success. We deal with situations of complex trauma, work with survivors of domestic violence, navigate mental health issues in students and caregivers, and address issues of food insecurity, transportation barriers, and more. From the beginning, the FCRC program was cutting edge. We blazed the trail and have received awards on a local and national level. To this day, our work continues to be cutting edge, demonstrating innovative practices in eliminating barriers to student achievement. We are considered a leader in our region in the development and expansion of community schools. However, the role of VPS is no longer as competitive as it once was in retaining and drawing in highly skilled employees due to salary inequity. For example, after 20 years of service, a VPS FCRC would still make less than the starting wage of FCRCs in many of the surrounding districts. We know we are valued in our schools and by our colleagues. We are asking that the district also value the work that we do by fixing the inequity in our compensation. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.
Dana, you are set to speak, correct?
Hi, yes, I am.
You may begin when you are ready. Please state your name and address for the record, and you'll have 3 minutes.
My name is Danabrenner Kelly, and I'm a resident of Bend, 60324 Woodside Road. My son, Gavlin, is a freshman at Flex Academy, and you heard from his dad earlier. I'm also going to share my concerns about plans to transfer out the principal at Flex Academy, but speak on a more systemic level. Flex Academy serves a very unique purpose in the district for a very unique demographic of kids. I work professionally as a leadership and organizational development consultant and help organizations develop their talent and create succession plans. So I, of all people, know how important it is to move talent into new roles. As a longtime educational advocate, I also recognize that personnel decisions, such as where to assign principals, are generally not the purview of the school board. My concerns are less about personnel decisions or people and more about appropriate district-wide practice in the face of a pandemic as it relates to trauma-informed decision-making and the support of our most vulnerable populations. Many don't know about Flex, but Flex is a small alternative high school made up of about 100 kids total. It's a place where kids who are often not successful in the larger schools can come and not only graduate when they might not otherwise, but thrive. It attracts kids who are prone to marginalization, kids with anxiety and other mental health challenges, kids on IEPs with multitude of disabilities, kids who do not fit in easily, and kids who are more likely to be bullied, misunderstood, and ostracized in traditional schools. The teens at Flex are amongst the most vulnerable of our teens at a time when all students are more vulnerable than ever. This isn't really the time to create instability for them. This school and its unique population should not be changing principals at the tail end of a pandemic, and especially not in the same year in which its learning specialist, who also works with all the kids on IEPs, is retiring. Since the pandemic, 47% of families report declining mental health in their teens. Teens themselves report unprecedented anxiety, depression, difficulty sleeping and focusing, and a general feeling of disconnection. This is the impact on the general population, not those who have already experienced trauma. The National Association of School Psychologists is calling the pandemic a traumatic experience and imploring schools to engage in practices that are trauma-informed in whatever ways possible to restore a sense of safety, power, and self-worth. There are 6 principles of trauma-informed practices for school application, and all of them are being violated in removing principles at this time. 1, maximize a sense of psychological safety and security. 2, maintain trust for staff and families. 3, allow for maximum support. 4, maintain relationships and share decision-making, voice, and power. 6, be responsive to past cultural and historical issues. These principles should inform decision-making for all district students as they fully return to school, and especially for certain populations. The decision to remove the principle from the district high school that is designed to specifically meet the needs of some of the district's most trauma-impacted kids during a time of greatly increased trauma for all is trauma-inducing. Please consider. Thank you.
So our next speaker is Natalie Francis.
Hello, thank you. My name is Natalie Francis. My address is 6358 Northeast 30th Avenue, Portland, Oregon. I've been an occupational therapist working with Vancouver School District for 6 years. My colleagues and I are speaking to the board today to present some information about school-based occupational therapy, to review our current conditions within Vancouver School District, and to provide clarity on the requests we will be making during the upcoming contract negotiations. And we have provided a PowerPoint that has been printed for you to reference. So first of all, what is occupational therapy? OT is a profession that helps people across the lifespan do the things they want to do and need to do through the use of therapeutic use of activities of daily living. Occupational therapy practitioners help people live life to the fullest by helping promote health and live better with injury, illness, or disability. We use a person-centered and individualized approach that incorporates current level of skill, environmental factors, and systems of task analysis to promote greater independence. For a school-aged child, engagement in school, physically, socially, and academically, is a vital portion of their activities of daily living. And while OTs have knowledge in all areas of child development, on the special education team, we are the fine motor, visual motor, and sensory processing experts. So on any given school day, a school-based OT might be running handwriting groups, working one-on-one with a student with a fine motor delay, playing on a swing with a preschooler to promote balance and coordination, consulting with a paraeducator about the appropriate use of a sensory tool to activate a student's vestibular system, and helping to create a break space in a classroom that students can access for regulation. In Washington State, OTs are considered related service providers. So on the WACS, related services is a term for those services a student with a disability needs in order to benefit from their special education. Related services include speech therapy, occupational therapy, physical therapy, audiology, and others. OT is a state and national board certified health profession that is considered healthcare practicing within the school setting. So our services may be reimbursed by Medicaid funding. OT as a related service only serves students receiving special education services who have qualified for OT through evaluation. So the only way that a student can access these services is when they display academic impact within the classroom and they're found to be significantly delayed upon OT evaluation. So just in summary, OT is a unique and vital part of the special education team that not only supports development of fine motor skills and handwriting, but also promotes greater independence and access to a student's educational environment. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Dana Moore. And,
Hi, my name is Dana Moore. My address is 5500 Northwest Lincoln Avenue here in Vancouver. I am also an occupational therapist for the Vancouver Public Schools for the past 4 years, and I will be donating my minutes to Elizabeth Quaty.
Fonde. I think I got that right now. And she will be given 6 minutes.
Hello.
Record, and you will be given 6 minutes.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Elizabeth Quaty. I live at 4613 Northeast 54th Avenue in Vancouver. I would also like to note that the board has been given a PowerPoint presentation of our information for the reference for the future. I have been an occupational therapist in Vancouver schools for the past 6 years. Given the information provided by Natalie, occupational therapists on this contract negotiation will be asking for a caseload to be more aligned with the Washington state average of 43. This would be in line with best practice and neighboring districts. It would support a more robust use of occupational therapy services for students with special needs. There is often a vision to have students with special needs to be more incorporated into the larger community. Having all children move about the school environment, attend assemblies, participate in more robust specials, and join in general education classrooms, in my experience, is welcomed by all. It takes extended learning for these students to feel comfortable in these spaces and within these activities, in addition to the standard needs of participation in their typical classrooms. Not only does this draw the student with special needs into the greater community, but it gives a natural experience and an environment for students to gain these living skills. Functional application of skills within the context of the environment is foundational for all learning, including for children with special needs. Occupational therapy is the profession that is making this happen. Our challenge within Vancouver School District is the current occupational therapy FTE allocation and workload for these professionals. Currently within Vancouver School District, the percentage of students with a need for OT services keeps increasing. OT staffing allocation has not kept up with the pace of this rising need. One reason is that occupational therapy FTE allocation is based on overall student enrollment in the district. It does not directly account for the percentage of students who are eligible for occupational therapy services. Staffing allocation has not stayed commensurate with OT need within the enrollment. School-based OT average caseloads within Washington state is 43. It is not typically dependent on the percentage of enrollment. With 7.3 FTE for occupational therapy within Vancouver School District, functionally speaking, the average full-time OT has a caseload of greater than 80. 4 years ago, this average was 45. In this way, our workload is not sustainable. For comparison, Evergreen School District has an 11 FTE of occupational therapy, resulting in an average full-time OT having a caseload of 36, with the difference between the two school districts of approximately 2,000 students in enrollment overall. Additionally, there are current concerns for the need of OT services to continue to grow. With the varying implementation of handwriting curriculum and general education supports for handwriting, students end up moving to the most restricted environment when visual motor deficits impede written communication skills. This often becomes a request for occupational therapy evaluation and services. The same scenario can be stated for students with self-regulation deficits that impact their ability to participate within the classroom. As our current OT FTE allocation stands, we are limited in our ability to provide proactive measures to assist this challenge. With a caseload cap commensurate with the Washington state average, Vancouver Public School could increase overall OT FTE for the district, increasing the quality, robustness, and integrated support for those currently receiving OT services through special education. We can all be on the playground with our students. We can practice assemblies and provide tailored sensory-based support. We can provide robust training to staff, including general education staff, to carry over what these children need. We can fabricate equipment. We can make fine-tuned adaptations. A child spends a majority of their work in school. We want to make sure that that time is spent feeling and doing the best that these children with special needs can. Our goal is for students to make progress, whether that results in exiting special education services or having success in a more least restrictive environment. A more reasonable caseload cap would allow greater progress. Again, I'd like to send a request that occupational therapists on this contract negotiation will be asking for a caseload to be more aligned with the Washington state average of 43. This would be in line with best practice in neighboring districts, and it would support a more robust use of occupational therapy services to students with special needs. Please support us in adopting an occupational therapy caseload cap for Vancouver schools to better ensure the provision that all children receive a free and appropriate public education. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Our last speaker tonight is Penelope Lindbergh.
Hi.
Please state your name and address when you're ready, and you'll have 3 minutes.
Okay. My name is Penelope Lindbergh, and I live at 512 Northeast 106th Street, 98685. Good evening, Superintendent and school board members. My name is Pepper, and I wrote to you recently about my concern about my future middle school's name. That's not what I'm here to talk about today, but it goes along with that. I'm here today to talk about school names. Recently in America, we have been really focused on racial equality. I, as a student, have seen how all people are flawed in their own ways. Some examples are Peter S. Ogden, Thomas Jefferson, and yes, even Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I propose we stop naming schools after people. I look up to Ruth Bader Ginsburg, but I don't think we should name a school after her. We should also examine the schools we have already named, such as Thomas Jefferson Middle School, Ogden Elementary School, Franklin Elementary, Sacagawea Elementary School, and more. We have many pretty native plants, flowers, and animals to name our schools after. I think we should do that instead of school names, instead of people names. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for your patience as we transition back and forth between in-person and technology. That went very smooth. So thank you to the team in the back. Now on to our business portion of the agenda, which our first item is the approval of minutes from November 10th, 2020, November 17th, December 2nd, December 8th, December 9th, and December 15th. Do I have a motion? Thank you, Kathy. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. We will go ahead and vote. I'm going to start with you, Director Decker.
I approve.
Director Zavala? I approve. Director Barrows?
Approve.
And Director Smith?
Approve.
And I also approve. Motion passes. Moving on to our consent agenda for the instructional and administrative support services and for the consent agenda for fiscal support services. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Director Decker. I will go ahead and call for a vote. Director Smith? Approve. Director Barrows? Approve. Director Zavala? Approve. Director Decker?
Approve.
And I also approve. Okay, moving into our regular business items on the agenda. And one note on the consent agenda, 2 items were removed this afternoon. They were duplicate error items. So if you were looking at the agenda yesterday online, you might have seen additional items. So moving on to our regular business for instructional and administrative support services. The first item on the agenda is the recommendation to approve settlement agreement and release of claims for the AE services for McLaughlin Middle School, Marshall Elementary School project.
So the rationale during the course of construction at McLaughlin Middle School, a mechanical engineering design error was discovered. A portion of the HVAC ductwork system was undersized and needed to be replaced. The mechanical engineer for the project identified the error and is taking responsibility for the cost to replace the undersized ductwork. The undersized ductwork has been replaced by the contractor and the district paid for the work. Per the settlement agreement, the project mechanical engineer will reimburse the district for all of the associated costs to replace the undersized ductwork. The total reimbursement amount is $192,622. The settlement agreement and release of claims document is attached, and the agreement has been reviewed by the district legal counsel. The recommendation is that the board of directors approve a settlement agreement and release of claims for with PAE Consulting Engineers Incorporated and LSW Architects PC, including reimbursement to the district for McLaughlin Middle School and Marshall Elementary School HVAC design error, and that the interim superintendent be authorized to execute the settlement.
I'll motion. I'll second.
Thank you. Is there any conversation or questions on this item? Okay, we can. Yeah, exactly. Correcting their mistakes, yes. We can go forward with a vote. Director Decker? I approve. Director Zavala? I approve. Director Barrows? Approve. And Director Smith? Approve. And I also approve. If you haven't noticed, I'm switching things up here. It's nice to not go.
As long as I'm not first every time.
Well, it's nice to not just go alphabetical. So our next item on the agenda is the recommendation to approve purchase agreement number 2021-014 infrastructure modernization.
In support of the Vancouver School District's current and future technology needs, the district is recommending a modernization of existing infrastructure. The project is inclusive of a migration from Microfocus eDirectory identity and access management to Microsoft Azure Active Directory identity and access management modernization to data center services, application protection and data protection, academic and business application integration, support and configuration management solutions, and security. This modernization project will be implemented and administered through the district's information technology services. This purchase is being made through NCPA contracts 0-01-82 with Dell and 01-96 with Promark and 01-97 with Synex. All are approved cooperative purchase contracts in Washington State. The total cost of services, hardware, and software is $3,150,648 plus Washington sales tax. In addition, in order to optimally implement this modernization plan, 2 standalone purchases will be executed for maintenance and support for $32,065 plus Washington sales tax and $28,000 plus Washington sales tax. These 2 purchases are necessary for the continued operations, but are a sole source purchase for the implementation. In future years, these purchases will continue but will not meet the threshold for required competition. Vendor utilization recommendation, utilizing the NCPA cooperative bid and based on staff research, it is recommended a contract agreement be awarded to Data Networks for the scope of service needed to provide a thorough and comprehensive Microsoft hybrid cloud and full data center virtualization solution for VPS. It costed the district $3,210,713 plus Washington sales tax. It is recommended that the Board of Directors award a purchase agreement to meet district needs for modernization of the existing infrastructure in the amount of $3,210,713 plus Washington sales tax per terms and conditions of the NCPA cooperative bid and allow staff to adjust quantities as necessary to complete the project. Thank you. That was a lot. Do I have a motion?
I'll motion.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. Are there any questions or concerns?
I just want to make a statement that I want to thank School Director Christine Ericbrenner for really doing the due diligence and the research on this and really bringing and also helping bring us up to speed about the technology and what we need in order to make sure that this school district is still among the best. And I really appreciate all the time and effort that went into this because I know it was a lot of effort. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Decker. I just want to also add, I appreciate all of the information that the team has shared with us. We've been briefed many times. This is a big investment for the district. I think we often focus about the technology that our students have in the classrooms, that our staff and our teachers have, but none of that works without a good infrastructure. So it is good to see the district being proactive and investing in our technology. Anyone else? Okay, I will call for a vote. Director Smith? Approve. Director Barrows? Approve. Director Savala? Approve. Director Decker? Approve. Okay, motion passes. Our next item on the agenda is the recommendation to approve change order with Robertson and Olson Construction, Inc. for VITA. On August 11, 2020, a contract was awarded to Robertson and Olson Incorporated, Camas, Washington, for the construction of the new VITA Elementary School. In accordance with the lease agreement between the district and the City of Vancouver, Article 7, Section 701, the City of Vancouver will pay for the design costs associated with an additional 37 parking stalls to expand the district's parking lot in the southeast portion of the premises. The district will construct the parking stalls as part of the overall VITA project, and the City of Vancouver will reimburse the district for all costs associated with the construction. The change order has been reviewed by the district's consultant, LSW Architects, and is recommended for approval. The total cost for the change order is $190,066.02, which will be forwarded to the City of Vancouver for reimbursement. It is a recommendation that the Board of Directors approve a change order for the additional parking stalls at VITA Elementary with Robertson and Olson Construction Incorporated in the amount of $190,066.02 plus Washington sales tax, and that the interim superintendent be authorized to execute the change order document. Thank you. Do I have a motion? So moved. Thank you. A second? I'll second. Thank you, Director Barrows. Any comments or questions? Go ahead and vote. So Director Decker? I approve. Director Savala? I approve. Director Barrows? Approve. And Director Smith? Approve. And I also approve. Motion passes. The next item on the agenda is the recommendation to adopt revised policy 1400 for meeting conduct, order, business, and quorum in the 1000 series Board of Directors. If there are no questions by the Board of Directors, we will move this to our June 8th board meeting.
We will be this is because immediate action is on the proposed policy is necessary, we are going to act on it tonight. This policy specifically is moving our meetings from 5 p.m. to 5:30 p.m. It's listed in policy, and so we are acting on it as a board, but there is immediate action required. So that is why we will be voting on it tonight, because it's in the best interest of the district to make this change to accommodate director schedules. So Aaron, I might defer to you, but do we read the full policy change?
I'll go ahead and
Okay.
read the rationale for you. So you have attached revised policy 1400, meeting conduct, order of business, and quorum, which is presented to the board of directors for adoption. For the board's convenience, additions are underlined and deletions are indicated by words and numbers lined out. The policy is revised because beginning in June 2021, the start time for the board's regular meetings, workshops, and work sessions will change from 5 o'clock to 5:30 p.m. Additionally, a new section is added to describe the board's workshops. Immediate action on proposed policy is necessary. Therefore, the policy will become effective upon adoption. The recommendation is that the board of directors adopt tonight revised policy 1400, meeting conduct, order of business, and quorum.
So to summarize, this policy changes our meeting times going forward from 5 p.m. to 5:30 p.m. And that will apply whether we are in person or virtual via Zoom. Do I have a motion?
I strongly support this.
You move, Director.
I
Decker.
moved to, yeah.
And I will second that.
Okay, thank you, Director Barrows. We will have a vote. Director Smith?
Approve.
Director Barrows?
Approve.
Director Safala?
Approve.
Director Decker? Approve. Okay, and I also approve. Motion passes. Meetings going forward will begin at 5:30. So the next item on the agenda is the recommendation. This will be a policy item that will follow our traditional kind of model. So it's a recommendation to conduct a first reading to adopt revised policy 2125, sexual health education in the 2000 series instruction.
And again, if our board of directors have no questions, we will move this to the June 8th board meeting.
Okay, thank you. Another policy item, number 6, recommendation to conduct a first reading to adopt revised policy 3241, classroom management, discipline, and corrective action in the 3000 series students.
If our board of directors have no questions, we will also move this to our June 8th board meeting.
Okay. Item number 7, recommendation to conduct a first reading to adopt revised policy 3432, emergencies in the 3000 series students.
And if there are no questions by the board of directors, this too shall be moved to our June 8th board meeting.
Okay, thank you. Our last policy, recommendation to conduct a first reading to adopt revised policy 6000, program planning, budget preparation, adoption, and implementation in the 6000 series management support.
Again, if no questions by our board of directors, we will move this item to our June 8th board meeting.
Thank you very much. Okay, so our next item on the agenda is a recommendation to approve a name for the new elementary school to be located at 8614 Northeast 25th Avenue. Just as a recap of where we are, the board was presented with 5 names per policy, which we were presented Tenny Creek Elementary, Sequoia Elementary School, Unity Elementary School, Ruth Bader Ginsburg Elementary School, and Sally K. Ride Elementary School. We reviewed these at our previous board workshop in April, and we had a discussion. There were a few favorites that kind of bubbled up. And we asked for additional clarification on some of the context around the name options provided, specifically Tenny Creek Elementary. The team provided a little bit more context around the names. These names were provided by community members. Does anyone have a motion that they would like to make on this item?
I'll make a motion. At the risk of disappointing Pepper, I'm going to make a motion that we name the new elementary at 25th Avenue Ruth Bader Ginsburg Elementary.
Thank you, Director Smith. Do I have a second?
I would like to second that motion.
Okay, thank you very much. So the motion on the table is to name our new 25th Avenue School Ruth Bader Ginsburg Elementary. We can open it up to conversation. Again, we have 5 choices. And when we vote on a motion, we can also make an amendment on a motion. Or if a motion does not pass, we can make an alternate motion. So this is really just opening up the conversation. Thank you, Director Smith. If you want to maybe just start.
I will speak to my motion, sure. We discussed this previously, so I'm going to repeat a lot of the things that I said at our last meeting when we looked at these names. I think it's a really exciting opportunity, frankly, to name it after Justice Ginsburg. I think she's an excellent candidate for the recognition of having a building named after her. You know, her work fighting against gender inequities, her work as an educator herself, as a professor, a law professor. And there's just so many different ways that she's such an excellent role model, I think, for all of our students. But one thing I do want to also say is that, she's known for a great many things, which I've already mentioned. But one of the things that she's also very well known for is her very, very close friendship to Justice Antonin Scalia, who could not have been more opposite her in so many different ways. And I think they might have been on opposing sides of arguments more often than not, you know. But they had a great respect for each other. They had a wonderful working relationship. They were very, very close. And I think that they're just such an excellent example of how we can have differences of opinions without being divided. And so I just think she's just such a wonderful example and a wonderful person to name a building after.
Thank you, Director Smith.
And this is Director Decker, and I would like to, I guess, not to repeat everything that Director Smith has said, but I find her story so compelling, and in an era where we are looking for ways to show our students that even when the world is telling you, no, you can't, you can. And she is just a wonderful example of somebody being told pretty much her whole life, you can't do this because, and her saying, oh yes, I'm going to do it. And I think that we need to elevate those role models when we can. And I had totally not forgotten, but it slipped my mind about her wonderful relationship with Scalia. And I think that is also such a great role model for elevating discourse. How do we talk about things we disagree with? And in the coming years, on our work with equity and our work with increasing opportunities, we're going to have some really difficult discussions. And so I think it's a great opportunity to put that at the forefront for our community.
I want to thank you for making the motion. This was also my top choice. I see her as a role model, not just for our female students, but for all of our students, because she broke through a lot of barriers. And I just think at this time that so many of our students are struggling and then going through this pandemic, she was a champion for social justice. And I would be honored that Vancouver would be one of the first districts or the first to get to name a school after Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I think it's a wonderful thing to celebrate. I will say that we got some feedback as board directors. I'm sure we got some individually and some as a group. I got very mixed feedback. I think there is there has been mention that this is a political decision. And why I would challenge back to that is that she lived her life committed to the law and to improving the life and making legal decisions grounded in the law. And it wasn't politics. I think what we're seeing in the current climate of the Supreme Court is not what was her legacy on the court. So, but I got a lot of feedback saying yay, and I got others that loved Sequoia and others that loved Unity. For me personally, the time seems right for RBG. I also think that RBG is a great school nickname. The notorious RBG Elementary School. Director Zavala or Director Barrows, did you want to chime in? There's, and again, I mean, we can make amended motions. Yes.
I think, you know, when I first reviewed the names, I had, there were a couple that drew me, or, you know, kind of were some of my favorites. Well, I personally love the name Ruth Bader Ginsburg Elementary. I think initially I was somewhat hesitant only because, like I said, I personally admire her legacy. You know, I wondered about kind of the reception in the community as a whole. And I think that was something that I really was thinking about initially. Since our conversation, I've had time to kind of dig in and research a little bit more on some of her history, as well as just kind of talking to various community members and asking their thoughts. And I was reminded by someone that, you know, there are other public figures that we've named schools after that, you know, come with their controversy or have, you know, for example, Martin Luther King in his time was very controversial. And I think now we look back and see all of the good work that he did towards equity and justice. And so I think that in being reminded of that, with humans there, and with naming schools after humans, there are going to be, you know, controversial topics, but often you have to be controversial to get things moving forward and make things happen. But going back to her role as a Supreme Court justice, I think kind of what you had said, that commitment to truth and to the law is kind of surpasses and kind of goes above the political, you know, climate and controversies that we see today. So as I've had time to think about it, I would support this motion if this is what, you know, our board as a collection wants to move forward with. So I do really like Sequoia.
I do too. Sometimes it's a little bit of controversy sparks really great conversations. When Governor Inslee visited Eleanor Roosevelt Elementary right before spring break, it was a really great school visit, but he commented on it being one of the few Roosevelt Elementary schools in the state of Washington named after Eleanor Roosevelt. And hearing the principal speak with such pride, and it became a theme to the classroom visits. And I think the name really can be a source of pride, and how wonderful for 500 lucky students to learn the history of a legal pioneer in our country.
I think Tracy's point that she made is valid with regards to Eleanor Roosevelt too. There's a time when that name would have been very controversial.
I'm making sure my microphone's still on. I'm reminded of a quote that RBG, and I'm probably going to misquote it in some way, but when she was asked how many women will it take to,
when will she be satisfied?
Yeah, when will she be satisfied? And she said when there are 9, and I'm sitting here looking across the dais with 5 female school board members. And I just think that some of the work that she did allowed us to be in our positions today.
Absolutely.
And to be elected officials for our community. So kind of
I don't really have a lot to say. I think it's a great choice. I do just, I guess my thoughts are just that I think I did like what Pepper said, you know, that naming a school maybe more on a neutral ground, right? I value Ruth Bader Ginsburg and a lot of these women or men, you know, but I think something to say just about the community, you know, Sequoia, I do also love that name too. Yeah, I guess my question is just kind of, does the community really represent what Ruth Bader Ginsburg is too? I know it's kind of in the in-between of the North and the South end, right? So I guess that's just my question is just more about the representation and if it's really going to be respected, you know. So that's just my take on it. I'm for it. I'm not against it. I guess that's just kind of my take on it. Sometimes we think, how can I explain this? It's, I think we're all trying to chug along and trying to be more open-minded and united. But at the same time, I also feel like we also have to be kind of thoughtful as to who we're asking, you know, who are we really taking into consideration for this name. So yeah, that's thank you.
Thank you. I think that your point about, well, what our speaker said tonight, and one thing I've learned in the last year as we've gone through renaming is that I think we can't consider anything permanent. There's probably going to be continuous evaluation of the appropriateness in our community. And to your point about Eleanor Roosevelt or King, it's kind of with time we gain perspective. Are there any more final thoughts, or are we ready to take a vote? Okay. Okay. Director Smith.
Approve.
Director Barrows.
Approve.
Director Savala.
Approve.
And Director Decker.
Approve.
Okay, and I also approve. So we have a new Ruth Bader Ginsburg Elementary School on 25th Avenue. Thank you all for the thoughtful conversation. I think that was very productive. Our next item on the agenda is a recommendation for adoption of resolution number 877, emergency waiver of graduation credits. So WAC 180-111 establishes an emergency waiver program to allow school districts to waive certain graduation requirements on an individual student basis. The intent is to help prevent students from being unduly impacted by unforeseen disruptions to coursework and assessments resulting from an emergency or disaster as defined by RCW 38.52.010. Emergency may also include national declaration of emergency by an authorized federal official. These emergency rules are for the novel coronavirus emergency in response to the gubernatorial declaration of emergency on February 29th, 2020. They apply to the classes of 2020 and 2021 in the 2020-2021 school year. The recommendation is that the Board of Directors approve resolution 877, emergency waiver of high school graduation credits. Thank you. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to open it up for any comments or questions. I just want to first start by saying I appreciate the administrative team's patience as I sought to learn more and understand. This is obviously something that we don't take lightly. We want our students to graduate with full credits, but this has been an extremely challenging year, and there have been a lot of barriers put on, especially on some of our students furthest from educational justice. So we definitely want to help everyone get to the graduation, get their diploma. Some assurances that I was made is all of the students that received these waivers would have started the year in good standing. So this isn't a gesture towards, you know, getting someone 2 years worth. They're just getting a little catch up to just cross that finish line. And then I think the other assurance that made me feel more comfortable is that the data reporting is going to be very detailed. So we'll be able to have a kind of hindsight review of all of the students that benefited from this waiver process. Is there any other comments or questions?
I would just like to say that we just finished up Teacher Appreciation Week. And so on top of this, what I'd like to say is, well, we are granting graduation waivers because these kids experienced barriers that we weren't prepared for. I also want to give a big shout out to the teachers that have worked with these kids for so many hours with all their heart and all their soul, trying to get these kids over the line. Teachers that have spent hours on the phone with them, hours on independent Zoom, hours not losing sleep, trying to figure out how do I get these kids to where they need to be. And this waiver is not to say, oh, well, we gave up and we just couldn't do it. This waiver is on top of the amazing amount of work that not just our teachers, but our FCRCs who are present and our counselors and our support staff and everybody in the building to help these kids get to where they need to be. And despite that, some of them are falling short. And so we need to give them that extra little push. But I'd like to say thank you to everyone who has worked so tirelessly. Well, maybe not tirelessly, probably very tired to work with these kids.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to call for a vote unless there's anything else. Director Decker?
I approve.
Director Zavala?
I approve.
Director Barrows?
Approve.
Director Smith?
Approve.
And I also approve. Okay, that is our last regular item on our agenda. The next item is our superintendent and board of directors report. The first item is a budget update. And the directors, we have our budget packets printed out for us.
Okay, I don't know if you all are ready for me, but if so, I'll go ahead and screen share. All right, before my screen takes over, it looks, are you guys able to see?
Yes, we can.
All right, excellent. All right, so yeah, just wanted to spend a few minutes tonight just updating you all with the progress of our budget development. As you know, things are evolving throughout the spring and sometimes even into the summer in terms of the key variables that drive our budget expenditures and revenues. So as we sit right now, some of the more significant things have already been determined. And so I'll just walk through what we think we know, or at least what we know as much as we're going to know about some of those key variables. So this slide contains a lot of data, obviously, but what I'm hoping to communicate with this is kind of some of the trend data that we have on our enrollment and how that's driving our forecast for the 2021-22 budget. You can see if we kind of, first of all, I'll call your attention to kind of the middle of the page, and you can see that in 2016-17, we were still growing at that point, and from the previous year, which you can't see, but we had grown 217 students. If you're tracking that particular line on the bottom, or excuse me, the middle of the screen. And then we started what was predicted by our long-term demographer to be kind of a slow, minor decline year over year for multiple years. And you can see the next 3 years of actuals had about 100 to 300 student drops. We forecasted in the budget for 2020-21 about a 291 student drop, or 1.28%. Obviously, the projected actuals for 2020-21 were significantly worse than that. And I think we all understand why that occurred. So now our challenge is to kind of understand, well, what was happening before COVID? And so before we move on to that 2021 forecast, I'll call your attention back to 2016-17, because I think there's a really, it's really easy to understand dynamic of what we were experiencing before COVID. If you look at the grades 1 through 3, that 1,542 students actually averaged about 1,850 per cohort or per grade. But a deeper dive into that showed that our grades 2nd and 3rd were over 1,900, and really the 1st grade in that particular year was closer to the 1,700. I think it was 1,724 if I'm not mistaken. And then if we look at the 4th and 5th grade and divide that by 2, because there's 2 grades there, you can see that really we were averaging pretty consistently cohorts at or slightly over 1,900. And then starting with kindergarten in 2015-16, and then certainly carried forward, we've been welcoming cohorts closer to the low 1,700s the last 5 years, really. The kindergarten that you in 15-16, which is off screen but represented in 1st grade on the 1st column, and then certainly the kindergartners for the next 4 columns over. So as those kindergarten cohorts matriculate through the grades, obviously there's a compounding effect on our bottom line enrollment. We still haven't seen a rebound in those kindergarten classes, and although we're optimistic that we're going to start to see an uptick, we're really flying a little bit blind into our post-COVID recovery, because again, focusing again still on kindergarten, that first line, in our projected 2020-21, you can see we dropped all the way down to 1,387 kindergartners that we're serving now. So what we believe is that there's a lot of families that held their students out because of the unique and unfortunate circumstances that we're all dealing with this year. To the extent that what we don't know is what extent they'll all come back into the public school system next year, and what extent maybe some of those younger 5-year-olds might be held out of their by their parents' choice next year. So as you can kind of start to see, there's a lot of uncertainty and a lot of variables around COVID, but then also just the underlying cohort population that we're having to grapple with as we come up with our forecast for 2020-21. So what we've arrived at, which we think is the sweet spot between being careful and conservative, but not necessarily failing to recognize that things look much more optimistic going forward than they do kind of looking at the last several months, both in relation to COVID and obviously our traditional enrollment patterns. So with that, we are estimating to grow back about 1.84% of our almost 6% losses from the previous year. And again, if you kind of look at the fact that we were losing between 100 and 300 students before, it's really more reflective of about a 700 student recovery from where we were, I guess the trends that we were had established prior to COVID. So is that absolutely going to be accurate? I sincerely doubt it, but our challenge is trying to figure out, are we more nervous that we're being aggressive, or are we more nervous that we're being too conservative? And so I think we've achieved that balance where we're equally likely to be wrong on the low side or the high side. So time will tell on that. I'll just pause for 1 second. There's still a lot of information to digest there, but with that, that's, yeah.
Sorry, he's fixing our audio here. Perfect. I know it's still early, but in terms of kindergarten registrations, where are we in relation to a traditional year, not a COVID year?
You know, I have not gotten that data, and quite frankly, that hasn't been the greatest predictor because we get such a relatively low response to that it's hard to pick up those 100 or even 50 or even 200, excuse me, swings that we've experienced over the last 6 years. So I will check in on that though, just to see if we're starting to see optimistic patterns there. But again, even the uniqueness of coming out and registering your students is a little bit different this year. So I'm a little hesitant to put too much stock in that, but it certainly is a marker that we will certainly go check on. Any other thoughts on this before we transition to the next slide? Maybe that's the best way to pause on this because they're kind of disparate topics. And so although they all relate to the budget, they pivot around pretty quickly. So I'll move on to the next thing that we typically look at when we're building the budget. We obviously start with enrollment, but then we look to Olympia and see what their policies might mean in terms of budget variables for us prospectively. So a couple key policies that the legislature did adopt in their budget this year, which is a 2-year budget. They saw fit to increase the technology connectivity for school districts by enhancing the funding for materials that they provide in their basic ed funding formula. Although we're very appreciative of that investment, in some ways it defies a little bit of logic that they would defer that and not fund it immediately when we're still struggling with connectivity and possibility of students needing to be served remotely. They've decided to defer that funding until 2022-23, which we're appreciative of, but it sure seems like it would be much more impactful to have that funding earlier in the spectrum of the pandemic. But nonetheless, we won't get any of that money this year. We'll look forward to collecting it in the 2022-23 budget. They also, again, decided to defer what would be really key funding to be provided immediately given our circumstances, and that's additional counselor funding in our high poverty schools. They define high poverty schools as those with 50% more or more free and reduced percentages. Obviously, our enrollment has been very volatile, and our actual free and reduced percentages have been a little less reliable than they would normally be because of the grace that we've been given to give all students free meals during the course of the pandemic, which will continue next year. So I'm a little afraid that although we could get up to 1.5 million, I'm a little afraid that our funding could be eroded by the time it's calculated next year, because we do have a couple schools that are teetering right around that 50% poverty level. So we'll stay tuned on that, and we'll optimistically hope for up to 1.5 million. Two other areas that they provided significant funding on, it's impossible for us to immediately calculate the impact on Vancouver public schools. The first one is transportation funding, kind of, they don't like to use the word hold harmless, but so it's basically a funding floor. As I think we've talked about in previous workshops or board meetings, our transportation funding is driven primarily by the number of riders on our buses. And so when our student population and number of school days where students are actually coming to school is down as a result of the pandemic, it drove our funding formula product down significantly. With this legislation, they're guaranteeing us a minimum of the 2019-20 funding levels. So the amount of funding that means to us will ultimately be the difference between that 2019-20 level and what we actually earn next year. And we won't know that until we start to see what our enrollment looks like. And certainly, although we can optimistically hope for full student attendance every day, that remains to be seen as well, obviously. So it's possible we might earn more than our 2019-20 level with our ridership, but at worst, we'll get the difference between our calculated and our previous 2019-20 levels. That's just a 1-year hold harmless or funding floor, so you can see there won't be any money in 2023, 2022-23 to augment whatever we earn through the formula. Last item is what they call learning recovery, and there's a pretty substantial amount of state funding appropriated for this, but it wasn't driven out through the legislation as a guaranteed allocation per student or by district. The legislation just refers to grants that shall be administered by OSPI. We've been pressuring OSPI for information on how they plan to administer those grants, but we haven't gotten enough detail to understand, is it going to be purely competitive where one district might get 0 and another a substantial amount, or is there kind of an entitlement that they're going to build in and then we just have to have an approved grant to access that entitlement? So more to follow on that, but we just simply don't know what that's going to look like yet. That was a one-time appropriation, although we suspect that there could be some carryover into the following fiscal year, the 2022-23. So I've just noted possible carryover from this year's grant or the 21-22 grant, but there's not new money that's appropriated specifically for 2022-23. So that's kind of the legislative summary. There's some good news in there, but there's some things that, you know, obviously we think, I think we would agree would have been better if they were funded immediately. Any questions on this one before we move on?
Brett, I have a question. This is Tracy. With the counselor funding, at one point you said up to 1,500,000. Is that what you said, or is it 1,500,000?
It's up to, and what I probably didn't do a very good job of explaining before that is it's going to be driven based on the data that's collected next year on how many students, or excuse me, number one, how many schools qualify for the 50% threshold or not, and then how many students are in those schools. So there's an enrollment factor, and then there's a free and reduced factor. And I think 1.5 may prove to be optimistic because of some things that are conspiring against us in terms of those two key variables. But we'll have to wait and see how that plays out next year.
Okay, and do you know when it says additional counselor funding, is that specifically school counselor roles, or does that kind of cover a broader range of like mental health services or behavioral services?
I don't believe there will be a, you know, you have to prove that you could only hire certificated counselors in those schools to keep the funding. And so I think it is pretty much a guide to say these are the priorities with the funding, but I don't believe, I haven't seen anything at this point. OSBI could still, through their rules process, come up with some criteria and restrictions, but I haven't seen those in the actual appropriation bill.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Move on to the next slide, which is after we get enrollment and legislative certainty, then we typically kind of just look at other variables that we can start to calculate the year-over-year differences, because with a budget that's approaching 350 million, we don't go line by line and create budgets from scratch. We roll things forward and then we identify the deviations or the variables. Legislatively, enrollment drives a lot of that, but then also we know that there's some fundamental things that are not necessarily in those categories. The first one is we've benefited historically, you know, ever since I can remember working with Vancouver Public Schools from the outside or inside. Vancouver has been a great beneficiary of a state program called levy equalization. And what it is it's a way in which they compare the relative property richness of a district to the average throughout the state. And it's a way of equalizing those that would have a harder time generating adequate levies based on their property values. And obviously, as we know, those drive the tax rates that voters have to accept to support their schools. With Vancouver's assessed value growing at a very nice rate, which is a good thing for a lot of things that we work with. It does erode our levy equalization funding. We saw a pretty significant drop in the current 2020-21 calculations. We're forecasting to lose another $6.5 million going into the next fiscal year. And again, the positive is our taxpayers are paying less and in a position to afford more of the levy based on their assessed values. But we are currently, in between levies, and so we're not necessarily able to immediately reap that, or at least the underlying logic of this reduction. Which leads us to the next line. We do build in a modest amount of inflation into our year-over-year levies when we ask our voters to approve a multi-year levy, and so that translates to about $2.9 million of additional spending power that we have as a result of those annual bumps in our levy collections. So that helps offset part of that 6.5 million, but it still leaves us in a little bit of a challenge with that trade-off there. And then lastly, we know that IPD is kind of the new term that they use for the COLA, what used to be called the COLA, and it's just basically the annual increase in funding for compensation to employees. What we know is the IPD, or implicit price deflator calculation, is about it's exactly 2% going into the 2021-22 fiscal year. The state will increase that factor in all of their funding formulas. However, we have a number of staff that are funded by sources outside of the state's formulas. And so when the state provides a 2% increase, we have to, or we choose to, provide that same 2% increase to all staff, whether they're in state-funded formula positions or not. So that's about a $1.1 million requirement of our local levy, or the overall budget bottom line, to meet that need for those funds for those staff that are not funded by the state. If we add all those up, kind of the adjusted rollover budget, allowing for those items, is about $4.7 million negative that we would have to, in a traditional year, we would have to have some very difficult conversations about how we resolve that 4.7. However, as you can see, I've alluded to, that's the pre-ESSER rollover. And so I might just go ahead and pivot directly into the next topic because it is linked, and then we can pause for questions. So ESSER, as I think most of us have come to be aware, is the federal stimulus funding that's provided for schools. I wish I knew off the top of my head what it stood for, but I've never managed to memorize that. So the first wave of funding that came in this form of federal stimulus dollars as it relates to COVID relief was actually called the CARES Act, but it served the same purpose as what we now call ESSER. And all of those funds were spent and claimed in 2019-20. So the first wave of this has kind of come and gone, but we were very fortunate to receive a second, and you'll see in a second, a third wave of ESSER funding. In December of 2020, Congress passed and the president signed a second bill that called for schools to receive these ESSER funding. And Vancouver's cut of that total appropriation was about $19.9 million. And then in March of 2020, Congress and President Biden approved a third wave of school-specific ESSER funding, and Vancouver's share of that was $44.6 million. So you can see, added up, we're approaching $65 million of available ESSER funds that make our $4.7 million deficit a little less daunting. However, there are some things that we probably need to talk about with ESSER. First thing, just to conclude this slide, is we have only until September 30th of 2023. So really the next 2 fiscal years and whatever we may need relating to the 2021. So maybe it's 2.5 school years is all we can use. These is the extent to which we can apply these one-time funds to meet the needs of our students. So the next couple slides are going to talk about what are the allowable uses of ESSER, but before we get into the detailed kind of programmatic aspects, are there any questions on the last couple slides?
I don't have any questions, but I did look it up. I did Google it. It's elementary and secondary school emergency relief. So
Thank you. All right, well then let's dive into the allowable uses. And so this one, you'll see that there's some terminology that maybe isn't the preferred terminology that we use in Vancouver for certain programs and certain populations. But I wanted to be very intentional about using the exact language where I could in terms of, I did consolidate a little bit, but I used the exact language from the federal appropriation bill because I wanted to honor that this wasn't the Brett Blechschmidt version of what we ought to do. This was exactly what the congressional bill authors put into the bill. So there's a series of them. I won't necessarily read each one of them, but we'll just kind of address each one. There's actually 2 slides to cover the whole. And again, I just wanted to be comprehensive and consistent in using their language. The first one is about coordinating responses relating to the virus. So I think we can look at that in terms of coordinated responses. And I think the actual bill goes on to say county and other agencies. So we might be talking about, you know, certainly vaccination efforts or testing efforts that most likely applies under this one. They go on to say that we should have the latitude to provide principals with the resources necessary to address their students' needs. So that's a pretty broad category as well, but certainly focused on the unique needs that students have and empowering systems to use the folks that are closest to those students and principals leading that effort to have the resources to meet those needs. We go on to talk about, this might be something that we talk about in terms of equity, but they chose to speak to the unique needs of low-income students, students with disabilities, English learners, racial and ethnic minorities, and homeless students and students in foster care. So again, we might have used a term like equity, but that's kind of what their approach was to that particular need. This one obviously I think speaks for itself. It's all about the cleaning and sanitization efforts that we've already undertaken and will continue for the foreseeable future. Next one tends to focus on kind of worst case scenario in our minds, I think, is that if we're not able to welcome our students into our buildings next year, or I guess starting now, we have the ability to use these resources to provide meals, technology, and other learning opportunities for students in the absence of the traditional ways that we provide those services. And then now we get into the educational technology that really, I think this gets into more of kind of that infrastructure versus necessarily devices, although it could be argued that there's devices included here, but just making sure that we have good platforms for that, what they're calling substantive interactions between students and teachers. Another broad category that could probably be interpreted multiple ways, but their terminology is mental health services and supports. Moving on to summer school and after school learning opportunities. That's what, you know, some of us have called learning loss, or the state in their appropriation called learning recovery. And then they a little bit redundant here, but I guess other, besides summer and after school learning opportunities, any other opportunities to address learning loss, particularly for some of those students with fundamental challenges or risk factors that we know have experienced particular difficulties as a result of the pandemic. Then we move into a little bit of the infrastructure again, and that there's a broad authority to make improvements to our HVAC systems, our windows and doors, to the end of increasing or improving indoor air quality in our school facilities. And then a broad reference to other repairs, I guess, besides air quality. And I suppose that might mean, you know, I suppose creating barriers or converting additional spaces to allow for more social distancing. Again, pretty broadly worded, as you can see, but clearly relating to facilities. And then lastly is a catch-all around, I suppose somebody could make the contention that this is about revenue loss. If you've lost your traditional revenue streams, then you can use these funds to maintain the programming and staff that were providing that funded services before, but now have because of the pandemic become unfunded otherwise. So again, another pretty broad one that looks at continuity of service as a result of revenue loss, I would contend. So those are the full list of allowable uses right out of, I paraphrased and consolidated, but again, tried to honor their specific words so that we could be as true to that for audit purposes as possible. Any questions or thoughts on that before we transition to the last slide? All right, then just to orient us to where we're at in the process, we've achieved a number of mileposts, both in Olympia as well as some of our internal processes. We are now in the process of gathering some of the recommendations, and you can imagine that they're going to be rooted in that ESSER funding and the specific needs and opportunities that we have to serve our students in new and unique ways as a result of our unique circumstances. So we will be gathering all of those recommendations and beginning some broad vetting of those. And then we'll meet with our board budget committee in early June, and in hopes that we will be able to consolidate all of the feedback and all of the ideas and opportunities that have been identified into a cohesive conversation for the board to consider at their June 16th board work session, where we can arrive at some final recommendations for then myself and my team to then implement into the final budget construction, which would then have a public hearing and adoption at the August 10th board meeting, as is our tradition. So that's all I have to share. Is there any last questions before I stop sharing my screen?
Brett, this is Kyle. Just looking at this timeline, thank you for all the information. Just thinking through, because a lot of the budget will come together between our board work session and the final approval on August 10th. So, and I know with everyone out it's summer and everyone's kind of going every which way, perhaps just some thought around what's the best format for board members to continue to ask questions. I assume we'll get updates in the briefings, but I just want to make sure that we're not creating too much workload, but we'll probably, as the budget evolves, we'll probably continue to have questions or feedback.
So yeah, that's a great question, and again, I think we're open to any update process and possibly another briefing or presentation. My hope would be, and maybe this is overly optimistic, but my hope is that we're going to be able to organize those essential crossroad questions and policy type questions into those the next couple conversations, because I don't want to not do justice to the complex work that my team, mostly, not me, not necessarily me, does, but most of the construction of the budget is just implementing the recommendations and implementing the discussions and priorities that that you all will be a part of. It's more the mechanics of getting all the salaries in the system and reconciled. It's the, you know, entering all the revenues into the appropriate columns, into the modules that produce the actual, you know, 1.5 inch thick budget document that is the product of that. What I hope is that we'll be able to rise up all of those consequential crossroad issues before that just mechanical process of constructing the budget. But I certainly would concede that there might be things that emerge and the unanticipated outcomes that we have to deal with that we'll need to regroup. So I don't know if that's a very good answer, but I guess I still have.
No, it is, and we can discuss it further at the work session on the 16th. I just want a mechanism where we are free to ask questions that might emerge. I know last year with COVID being new, it was a bit wonky and we hadn't yet really met. So, and there were so many unknowns. I just want to make sure, because I think we were asking overlapping questions. So I want to make sure that we are streamlined and have kind of a mechanism in place for follow-up questions.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great platform to see where we're at on the 16th and what may still be residual questions or concerns or uncertainties that we have at that point, and then we can game plan kind of how we want to attack those. So I appreciate that perspective.
Are there any other questions for Brett? I just want to thank you for the detailed information as always.
You're welcome.
Well, that concludes the superintendent report for next year's budget. The last item on our agenda is a board of directors report. We had the recent opportunity, I think everyone's finished theirs. Okay. Of doing school visits. This is something that historically board of directors do a couple times a year, but due to COVID, we haven't been in the buildings in over a year, some of us longer than that. So we recently completed them, and I just, especially for our community who also doesn't have access to the schools, I wanted to just share some of the good work that's going on. I'm going to put Director Smith on the spot.
I think one of the things that I know, I mean, first, what an amazing, it was so joyful to be in the buildings, frankly. It was just so wonderful to be there. One of the things that I kept commenting on as we went from building to building is just how normal it felt, which was really nice to see. The students kind of all knew exactly what to do. Their protocols were very ingrained, they just knew it was very comfortable. It was a very comfortable place. I had gone before I think all of us had done it before we had gone to the 4 days. And so buildings were very much in preparation for that. I don't know that I've ever seen so many old single student desks in my life. They were just everywhere. I'm glad that we held on to them for so long because they definitely make lunches a lot easier, for one thing. It was nice to see that. I know my daughter, who's a middle schooler, they get a chair in the cafeteria, but for our younger learners in the elementaries, they have a desk, so they have a flat surface, which was nice to see. And I just wanted to also just recognize all of the efforts of our facilities people to move those desks around was a huge, huge effort. And I just can't imagine how daunting a task that must have been. So I wanted to recognize their work in getting our buildings ready to go to 4 days a week. It was just really exciting to be there. I had some really great conversations, just kind of looking forward to next year and thinking about, what are some of the things that maybe we've learned that we can let go of, that we kept doing because that's what we do and not necessarily because that's what we need to do. And also just kind of thinking, everybody's optimistic that maybe we can be back as close to normal as possible next fall. I think we all agree that that's what we want. But looking at it as an opportunity to maybe rethink how we do some things in our buildings, and how we can make it better for students too. And everybody's kind of open to that. It's a really actually very exciting time, I think, in education. It's been a very dark time in education, but I think there's a bright light ahead, and people seem to be super excited about moving forward.
I think I was the first one, because I went and did visits before the decision to go to increase in-person learning to 4 days for some of our students. And so I was able to ask the principals a lot of questions about kind of their readiness for that and kind of what do you need in order to do that. So it was great just getting to talk to the principals and kind of see everything in action. I agree, it felt so good to be in the schools and see, you know, students were very used to the procedures. I went at arrival time. I specifically wanted to see arrival time kids arriving on bus and cars. And it's funny because then we went into the building and I realized we had gone through the thermal scanner, which for some reason I was picturing it very different. I think I pictured it more like a metal detector or some sort of contraption, but you know, so I got to see and then saw different students come in and the little, you know, green square come over their head. And it was just fascinating to kind of watch that process. And, you know, seeing the different formats that teachers were doing in the classrooms in terms of, you know, some teachers had their students, you know, there at their desks and had their Zoom screen up with students live streaming, and some, you know, had just their students in the class. I mean, there were all sorts of different variables. I think the thing that I went away with is just how different every school implemented the guidelines and the different ways that they were able to, with kind of that those allowances to kind of figure out the routines that are going to work best for them. Because every building is different. And so when it comes to increasing learning and kind of those parameters, you know, the different challenges, you know, the lunchroom at one school looks different from, you know, lunch in another building and from elementary to secondary. But yeah, it was great just to be out in the building and see students. All the students seem so happy. You know, they have their routines down. It was just great. It was a great visits.
I had the opportunity to visit the start of the week for the 4 days a week last week. And it was such a buzz. Like, it was such an exciting, so I really enjoyed it. And I think also, like other directors are saying, that seeing the differences between the schools and also being able to, I think, also be in the new schools was also really awesome. One thing I took away with, at least, well, my son got to start 4 days a week this week, last week as well. And so they were telling me at Harney that there was 2 students that they were in A group and B group. And so they finally got to see each other, and they thought they moved away. And so they were like best friends. And so they were just so excited to be with one another, and like that they thought, you know, they moved away, that they were gone forever. And so I think this is the positive of all of this, is just that we're back, and we're, I don't know, just the kids being kind of, like my son said, I want to go back to normal, you know. But I think also what I came away with is just the big differences, you know, between schools, the schools that have much more space and the schools that don't have space. And that they're doing the best they can with the guidelines in place. You know, Walnut Grove was a very, very, just the schools were just, kids were really condensed, and, you know, they're doing the best they can. And I think, you know, compared to a school like Salmon Creek that had a lot of space, and I think they do with what they can. And so I think I would just like to acknowledge and thank all the teachers and principals and all the staff that are just working so hard to make every day possible. Because I think there's just been so much going into this, and more than we know, and I just applaud everyone.
So when I went to my school visits, the administrators always started with, well, what do you want to see? And I'm like, what do you want to show me? What do you want me to know? And I said, I want to know all I'm going to ask for 2 things. What are you proud of? And what do you need? And every single administrator said, I am so beyond proud of my staff. Every single one's like, just gave kudos and just talked about their staff. And they kept saying, but I haven't shown you this. And I said, no, I just want to hear what you're proud of at your school. And some of our administrators, I don't know if people are aware, I mean, they have had a lot put on their shoulders and have had a lot of stress, and they've had some medical issues caused by this stress, and yet they show up every day and are excited to be there and excited to work with their staff. And it was so obvious how so many of our administrators have in a part through this pandemic, created sort of a family structure within their buildings. And they're really looking out for the people that work for them. And that was encouraging. And when I said, what do you need? They're like, a lot of them said, we just need our staff to know how much we love them and how much the school board appreciates them and how much they've worked hard. So again, I was so encouraged by how everybody has come together to do what's best for the kids, and the excitement too. There was one school in particular that we didn't make it, actually, it was Geyser. We didn't make it past like the 6th grade wing. We stood in the middle of the 6th grade wing for 30 minutes while the principal talked to me about all the things that they had learned through this pandemic, the things they need to change, the things that worked for these kids, the things that didn't work for these kids, and how excited she was to take that next step and to change some of the things that are going on in the school. And when it was time for me to go, she goes, but I didn't show you anything else. I said, oh no, this is what I want to hear. And this is what I want to see. I want to know how our schools are working. The buildings, I mean, King was beautiful. I'd never been inside it. King was gorgeous. But as a school board director, I want to know what's going on inside those buildings. So I thoroughly enjoyed meeting with all of those administrators and hearing how much they love their staffs. I want to thank Kathy and the administrative team. We all had hosts that took us. I went to 8 schools, and I actually had the fortune of going to 4 schools when it was hybrid still. And then I went to 4 schools when it was 4 days, when it was, more kids back in the classroom. And so it was fun to see kind of that difference and just the different energy level, the different volume level. But I think, as many of you have acknowledged, each one of our schools is so unique and has a unique community. And so really kind of the response to hybrid and then 4 days a week is unique at every school. I'm very grateful for everything. I got to see so many different classrooms and, just innovative approaches to live streaming and integrated classrooms, just so much wonderful work. But I really focus the conversations on, Wendy, what you touched on is what's the opportunity coming out of this, because we don't have to just go back to pre-COVID, we can reimagine. And, one principal specifically said, what I've learned is we've always been so hesitant about change because of how it will affect the students. But what we've learned is that the students are the most resilient ones, and they've adapted to the change so well. It's been a hard year on everyone, but students truly are resilient. And so it is time to start innovating and pushing the envelope, perhaps. I also will say, just from our bond program, being in a couple of the new buildings and seeing some of the design, the intentional spaces, how they work for self-regulation and breakout spaces, or better occupational therapy rooms, the better natural light that's in some of these spaces. So it's nice to see the design in real life. But anyway, so thank you, Kathy, to your whole team.
it definitely informs our work to be able to actually be and see it in action. Yes. Well, that concludes our meeting. Thank you, everyone. We're kind of on a roll of 2+ hours, but just as yes, but just as a reminder to everyone, we will be meeting at our regular board meetings in person at 5:30, and all additional meetings will be via Zoom at 5:30 p.m. And our regular board meetings are the second Tuesday of the month. Okay, we are adjourned.